Hopefully you can see us both. And I'm at the University of Glasgow. Carole, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm at York St John University.
And we're going to talk to you today about zines and how we think they can be personal, political and participatory. And they have the potential as a really great active learning activity and also as a form of assessment. So first, for people who don't know what a zine is, it's pronounced zine because it's short for a fan zine or a fan magazine. Started off all the way back in the 1920s. There's a connection with science fiction, with feminism, pop culture. You can, on the screen, there's some examples of zines, one of which says resistance is fertile. It's got a picture of a woman of colour breastfeeding on the front. So to give you an idea of the kind of topics, it can be all sorts of different things, but often quite personal and often quite political. And it's been said that they can be a messy hodgepodge of personal thoughts or an expertly designed political treatise. So they're kind of different levels of formality. And above all, zines are outside of the mainstream. They're independent. They're not published by, publishers or anything like that. People make them themselves independently, and they are free to produce. They're free to, they are sold, but often at a very low cost. And more there are free examples online. So how do you make a zine? I'm glad you asked. They can be big or small. I've got an example here they typically tend to be around this size, which is A5, I think, but they can be any size. They can be really colourful. They could be just black and white on a photocopier. They can be handwritten. They can be typed. For this example here, they've used a typewriter and then cut it out and stuck it on. This is a zine about how Bruce Springsteen is an awesome queer icon, just random kind of all these different topics you can have. And they can be put together very loosely. They can be stapled together very simply like this one is. They can be made very beautifully. Some people kind of sew them, but basically you can make them any way you want and they don't have to look super duper professional. They can be very, very informal.
So, what we wanted to do as part of this was to incorporate some doing as well as us just talking to you. So we're inviting you as part of this presentation to have a go at creating your own page of a zine, because we have only got 25 minutes and we'll be presenting at the same time. So we've asked people to bring pens and papers. We're thinking about getting you to represent some kind of a journey. So it could be your journey through thinking about whether or not you could use a zine assessment in one of your courses, or what kind of courses or what kind of assessment zine might be good for. So please do have a go at doodling as you go. There will be an option to share your zines at the end. It's not compulsory. And there will be 4 minutes, and we do mean 4 minutes because it is a 25-minute presentation, to have a go at kind of jotting your ideas and producing something before we finish.
And there'll be no pressure to share if you don't want to, no. But you can if you like. And Carole and I will be doing some as well. So what are zines good for in teaching? Well, historically, they've been connected to feminist pedagogy, and that has included these 3 key things: participatory learning, validation of personal experience as important, and critical thinking skills. But you don't have to be using a feminist pedagogy in your teaching to use them. It just happens that this feminist pedagogy approach links up quite nicely to active learning, because I think those 3 things, so participatory, personal experience and critical thinking skills, line up somewhat with some of these active learning key things. And these are all from the Active Learning Network website, from Tab Bets. Higher order thinking skills, so using a visual assessment or in some way non-linear in order to show that you make connections at a higher level. An emotional connection to content, so sometimes you might be using the hierarchy of thinking about different, demonstrating different verbs in intended learning outcomes, but we often forget that there are other aspects to it as well. It's not just the cognitive ones, it's also the emotional connection that can be really important. and tactile or physical engagement with the environment. If you're actually, so often I think students are doing everything online, and actually to be having something physical in your hand to learn from, or to look at and to read and to create, is another way of engaging with learning more actively. So people do use zines in academia. Here is an example of somebody who has made their PhD into a zine. There's lots of writing. I won't go through all of it, but the key things are that it's a PhD thesis on missionaries and Jews in Victorian London. And they've outlined their 3 research questions using these question marks to show really clearly what the research questions are. And they've used a boat to represent a journey from Russia to England that some of these migrants took. So you can see how they visually begin to make use of a kind of informal format to get across ideas. And on the right-hand side, they've done a kind of an example travel document of a Jewish immigrant into London. And so they've thought about the key things that are important about what they're trying to get across to the reader, and they've made it into a zine. But there are some people who say that we shouldn't be doing this with, or we should be careful about how we use zines, and that actually sometimes it can be appropriating a form of expression that's come from often working class young girls, for example, are often the kind of key producers of zines. And Cassio has argued that zines are or should be motivated by passion and not profit, but they've been co-opted by organisations and brands to kind of seem cool. So I think we should really think quite hard about whether we should be using them for assessment. And my advice personally would be, do your research on zines. Don't just think, oh, they look cool and pretty, I'm going to use them. Understand where they come from. Think about if they're appropriate for your course. And I think sometimes they really are very appropriate when it comes to kind of personal and political reflections. So, and ultimately, we shouldn't be forcing students into making personal declarations about their identity, for example. And I think it's important to think about being accessible. We should always be thinking in all of our teaching all the time, is our teaching accessible? And we should continue to follow best practice with things like zines. So, for example, if a student is blind, or even if we don't know if we have a blind student, we should still be explaining the key elements of visuals. We should give examples in a variety of formats. So large print, giant print, high quality digital zines that can be zoomed into so people can see them more clearly. And you can also get audio zines. And get used to describing visuals. It's hard. It takes a lot of practice. It can seem a bit unnatural at first. So I want you to kind of think about, even if you don't know if there is a blind person in the room, trying to describe those visuals, because it will make you also realize what are the important things about these visuals. So on this slide, I'm not going to describe the icons because they're not key to what I'm saying. They're just there as little visual reminders. And so as well as being able to access reading zines, it's also how do we get students to access creating zines. So we give them an option of the type of zine that they want to create. Carol and I, when we were running this module together, when we both worked together, thought hard about how we would make sure students had access to free resources. Even things like being able to buy the bus fare to get to university, to use the photocopier, all of those little things started adding up for people. So you might think about how they can use digital images. Maybe you can bring in magazines and newspapers for them to cut out and print. And also if you can provide free printing for your students if they don't have it already, depending on what your institution does. And also, it's really important for access to have clear learning outcomes. So, for example, one of your learning outcomes might be that students need to critically reflect. That's not the same as having to share everything about themselves. Students shouldn't be feeling forced to make disclosures about their personal identity if that's not relevant, which a lot of the time it won't be. And Carol.
So the module that we specifically used this for was a first year undergraduate module called Understanding Childhoods. York St John University isn't a high tariff university. We tend to get students who are from more disadvantaged backgrounds. We get quite a lot who are local students or who are commuting in. So we tend to have students who will have experience of living in disadvantaged areas and more disadvantaged upbringings. The assessment or the module for understanding childhood asks them to look critically at how childhood is constructed. In particular, there's a lot of emphasis on sort of different experiences of childhood and the extent to which they are presented as being, fingers up, proper childhood. So looking at race, at poverty, at disability, and at other countries and cultures and how childhood is experienced there. So there's quite a critical take on it. The students on this module are all on children, young people and families, early years or education and special educational needs degrees. So most of them will be looking at going into careers that will involve communicating with children and families, often in a variety of different formats. So that's one of the reasons we've got a zine on this module. It tries to get students to think critically about how they're communicating ideas and to use a range of different approaches that's not just about writing essays or writing paragraphs, thinking about how they can use images or diagrams to help them communicate what's going on. The module asks for critical reflection. I've said that already. So the zine format again provides some ideal formats where you could put in an image of a child and then unpick it critically, looking at what things are shown and are not shown and what ways that communicates how childhood, fingers up, should or shouldn't be. There's also a big emphasis on the voice of children and young people, particularly those from marginalised groups, in the teaching of this module, which again echoes some of those zine traditions, providing voices for marginalised groups. So again, the format of the assessment fits quite well with the content and the subject matter that we're looking at. Just have a next slide. So these are some examples of the work that students have submitted over the last couple of years. One of the things that zines can be really effective at doing is presenting timelines. So here we've got two different timelines. The timeline on the left looks at the introduction and the changes to sex education policies. What's really clever about this is they go from 2000, but you've got a little icon under the 2000 which has got the UK flag on. So they're talking about different countries' approaches and comparing some of the different countries' approaches. The next point up is 2006, 2008. It's got an American flag on it. And then we go all the way through 2017, 2018, right up to 2023, looking at the new sex education review. And they looked critically at how children are constructed in this, particularly thinking about ideas about risk and what children, or what some people argue children need protecting from. The second timeline is a more simple timeline. This was a zine that looked at the impact of the coronavirus on children and young people. Again, looked quite critically at the extent to which they were impacted, but the extent to which they weren't able to have a voice or to communicate their ideas about things that could or could not, were not supporting them. So again, we'll go all the way through from the 18th of March in 2020 in the UK, when schools were closed, and then looks at the different kind of policy announcements that related to children, all the way through to March 2021, when in the UK we returned back. So zines can be really effective at communicating quite complicated timelines really, really simply. Shall we have a look at the next ones? The next example is taken from a zine that was looking at homelessness. What we've got on this example is a series of call-outs, what are they called? Speech bubbles, that's the word, which contain words from particular children or families who have experienced homelessness. What this page did really nicely was to put front and centre the real experiences of children and families, and compared that to some of kind of the official policy narratives or the presentation of children as kind of being dependent and voiceless and or not featuring in ideas about homelessness, that the homeless people are not children and are not families. So it really emphasised that quite strongly, and the use of the speech bubbles highlighted that these were people's voices. Can we have a look at the next one? And this is the final one. This was looking at social media and children, how social media and policies around social media draws on constructions of children or constructs children. And this is a lovely little take. So we've got at the top a little a sort of cartoon of a cowboy. I was trying to think of the non-gendered way of putting that.
I'm not sure if there is.
I don't know. And we've got a Stetson halfway down at the bottom. We've got a cactus, and it's framed in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So they are using some kind of playful descriptors to help analyse how social media can be positive. It talks about LGBTQ communities and neurodiverse communities who found spaces or created safe spaces online, looks at the bad in terms of cyberbullying, and then looks at the ugly in terms of online grooming. But again, using icons and pictures to illustrate, but also to help develop a critical narrative and a structure to give that critical narrative.
So this is the bit where we're going to give you a little bit of time, probably more like maybe 2 or 3 minutes, just to kind of finish off what you're doing. And again, nobody has to share anything they don't want to. And there's also a website called Canva, CANVA, and that is free to use. And and it has lots of free to use bits to it. You can also pay for some extra bits, but I think the free one is fine. And it's quite a good place to create digital zines that some of the students kind of discovered and found quite useful. So that's another option. Again, I think emphasizing that it doesn't have to be perfect at all. It's a rough draft. So let us give you a bit of time to just think, 2 minutes. And I also think silence sometimes is quite nice, isn't it? So
I just put the Canva link in the chat if anybody wants to have a look at that.
Right, so I don't know if anyone feels like they want to share anything they've done. You do not have to. It's absolutely not obligatory. I think Carol might be our Blue Peter. Here's one I did earlier.
Well, I've got one I did earlier and one I sort of did live-ish. So shall I go first?
Go on.
So the one I've got here, I can't see me. Oh, there we go. I can see.
I can see
you. So the one I've got here is that. Can you see?
Yeah, it's good. Somebody else is sharing as well, so I'm just looking at that.
What is a zine? So it's very simple. I've made myself a little zine on my zine. So we've got a little bit there where we can look at some of the history of it and what it's about. Again, cut and paste there with highlights, and then kind of an image that shows that it's DOA feminist and all of the rest of those bits there. So that was my little Blue Peter one. Has anybody else?
And I'd like to re-emphasise that wasn't done live.
That's
was definitely done with a lot of Clive is showing us a page which has a big spiral on it. Clive, would you like to describe what you've got there?
Yeah, I'm out walking, so all I've got is a pen and a piece of paper, but I use the labyrinth as my metaphor, which has obviously got historical connotations and about being lost and found at the same time.
Yeah, brilliant. And what is it that's written at the top there?
Labby, labo.
What does that mean?
Well, labby is short for labyrinth.
Oh yes, of course.
Labo is short, I guess, for labour.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing. I really appreciate that. Okay. Anyone else want to share anything they've done?
Oh, you've got the blur feature on.
You're muted as well, I'm afraid, at the moment.
Okay.
All these technological things.
Yeah, okay. Don't know if you can see it.
It's disappearing.
It's just becoming trees.
Switch off the background then.
I think it's quite interesting, this map. Brilliant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So can you describe just what you've got there?
A collaborative sign. So it's a journey from kind of mind mapping and outlining to who does what, then you knit the pieces together to a whole and you present it, or you go to a gallery or something.
Lovely. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that. Thank you. The other thing that occurred to me that actually just when I was thinking about it is in terms of developing students' study skills, this doesn't have to be something that is necessarily to do with content, as it were. It might be, thank you, it might be to do with content, but it might be also asking students to reflect on the study skills they need to develop or that they have developed. And all of these kind of things more and more important, especially places like York St John. Well, no, I think probably everywhere. There's students who come from non-traditional backgrounds or who need, you know, it's not enough really to just say now, go and do some independent reading. What does that mean? What does that look like? So that kind of reflection, I think.
One of the things we did also, as we taught it this time round, was ask students to use different formats to do note taking. So rather than written, there were different examples. So there's a way that you can fold an A4 piece of paper to make a zine. So we got them to do that, and then right, I want your notes to be gathered onto these 8 pages about the key things that you've got from today. We did a timeline one where we looked at policy or developing ideas about childhood. We did a pros and a cons one where you looked at kind of the good and the bad and how you could picture that. So this is the one that I kind of did live. So here I've just got it's traffic lights. Red was ideas for where I wouldn't use an assessment. So when it's right or wrong, where it's quite formal, didn't get around to doing the middle ones. And then green were where it's critical, where it's reflective, where it's creative, where it's flexible, and where it's exploratory were times where I thought that we might be able to use that.
Brilliant, thanks, Carole. Are there anyone want to be brave and show theirs, or any questions anyone has for the last 1 minute? I think we've got
Marshall.
Yes, got a brave person.
Hello, Gillian. I don't know, it's very scribbly, but I'm going to be teaching on global applications of bioveterinary science, and I thought it could make a good collaborative project. So rather working groups were looking at animal welfare issues in different continents and then bringing it together into one zine.
Yeah, fantastic. And that it kind of works really well for those kind of patchwork of things as well, slightly different styles, not too worried about the it looking perfect, but all of the, centralizing those ideas. Brilliant, thanks.